Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, sponsored by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm your host, Randy Johnston, with co-host Brian Tankersley. We are pleased to talk to you about the latest Agentic AI developments. Many of these were released over the summer. Now, you do know that there are large language platforms in the market, just like we talked about in the new AI action plan for the US. We believe right now the safest of the platforms is Claude, followed by Copilot, followed by Perplexity, followed by ChatGPT, and then Gemini. But popularity, it's hands down ChatGPT at 61% market share and Copilot at 14, followed by Gemini, Perplexity, and Claude. Now, I just lay out the large language models because what we're talking about today is not that. We want you to get productivity from the large language models, but where we think AI will really be a winner is in the use of agents. Now, Brian, you know that there are several advantages to agents. What would you like our listeners to know about that?
Well, agents will actually take action without you having to do much of anything. Okay. And so they will actually go through and they will do multi-step processes. Okay. If you've used generative AI, you've noted that you can get it to, for example, go out and create an outline for you. And then you can say, okay, flesh this outline out and fill it out. And it will start to balk as you start trying to do this. But you can go through this thing, but you have to manually kind of feed the pieces in here. Okay. Think of agentic AI as I guess kind of like the paper tray on a printer, as compared to when you have to manually feed things in. Okay. Like, some of you, whenever you print out something that's going to be on letterhead, you manually feed the paper in and you have it set to use a different tray. And then you have to sit there and feed the things in. My labels I put on my honey jars, I have to manually feed them in, okay, one at a time. And that's kind of like what happens when you're using the traditional tools. Now, if I had agentic, however, it would go ahead and it would make the list, and then it would go in and do multiple steps. We've seen this with the Perplexity search, with the deep research tools that are in some of the platforms. The idea here is that it will do complex things, and then it will take its own actions as needed on things. I remember there was a guy from, this is probably 10 plus years ago. There was a guy that did a presentation at AICPA Engage on self-healing networks about some of the things that happen. For example, they had bots that would actually detect when there was behavior that looked like ransomware, and it would automatically shut down that action taking place on the network to stop ransomware from being able to read and write files if something was acting like ransomware. And so this whole point of doing this is that, again, lets you have better workforce specialization, gives you better trustworthiness. It lets you be a little more innovative. So again, you think about managing complex IT. What if something could detect that you are running low on, and we've seen this with some printers now, where they now, if you subscribe to toner and they detect that you're printing a lot and you're low on toner, they just automatically ship you some. And so there are services out there that do this. For customer service, again, taking actions on your behalf. I wish I had an agent that would go out, for example, and when there's a greater than 80% chance of severe thunderstorms near an airport where I'm flying, I wish that I could get the agent to go out and automatically book me a backup itinerary. Okay. Without me having to do anything, kind of the same thing an executive assistant would do. But again, sales support, healthcare and social care, content creation, there are a lot of things like this that agentic AI does, and it does use sophisticated reasoning and iterative planning. What if somebody, when they sent you an email, the agentic, the tool would automatically generate a proposed response to it, or you could put a few items in. And again, that's where Copilot's coming in, where you can actually have it generate responses to these things. But again, when we move into agentic now, it's really going to work and act intelligently and independently to solve these problems. Okay. So it really is, in this world, the bots are going to take action. Now, the hard part about it is that is that these bots are going to need access to more and more and more of kind of the keys to the kingdom sensitive information, like your passwords, like your email, like your text messages on your phone and all those things, if they're going to generate these responses and these other pieces of things in here.
Yeah, so you've heard from Brian that really the ability to work autonomously is a big deal with agentic AI. They tend to hallucinate less. They are really self-directed. And if we contrast agentic AI and generative AI, it's for agentic AI, it's autonomous action and decision making. The autonomy is high, the adaptability is great, goal setting capability is inside the agentic AI, and human oversight required is very minimal. Whereas with generative AI, it's content creation based on the prompts, and the autonomy is very low, like Brian cited with the paper feeding issues. There's some adaptability in the Gen AI engines. For example, agents have been added to Chat GPT. So the big LLMs are going to be trying to build more and more agents for your use. But we think agents are going to be built in products, which is what this session is really about. And with generative AI, there's very little independent goal setting, and you have to have human oversight because what's sometimes produced is just inaccurate. I was actually using generative AI for a report yesterday and realized it had just spewed some garbage, which was kind of logical sounding. If I would have been a little more tired, it could have slipped through the cracks and my piece that I had it right would have been wrong. But, there's a lot of difference between file cabinet CS and Go File Room, and it crossed those two up.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's again the thing about agentic here is that it really uses this four-step process for solving problems. It will perceive and see an opportunity or see an action that needs to be taken. It will then reason what the appropriate reaction is. It will then act, and then it will learn from the feedback. And so as we're thinking about this now, it could take inputs from a wide range of different things. For example, one of the things that I wish my cameras would model would be, if my cameras model and they see a skunk in one of my bee yards, it should put something on my to-do list to go out and trap the skunk and get it the heck out of there. And so this, again, it can take input from, again, unstructured data sources like text and email and web pages and things like that, and databases, as well as unstructured data sources like cameras and pictures and other things like this. But I will tell you that my AI on my cameras is just not very good. Yesterday I was looking at my cameras I have on one of my bee yards, and two of my dogs walked through, and it flagged the motion in there. But unfortunately, the AI in it identified the two dogs that were walking next to each other, or walking, excuse me, one in front of the other. It identified them as a car, which I thought was kind of sad. So, it's, again, with this, you are going to need to have higher cognition in here. So again, you're going to have, again, the thing I would say here is the agentic is going to have generally better executive function, where again you can say, I want you to do this, and it will come up with a list of tasks, and then we'll go attack those tasks sequentially. One of the things that's also different about some of the new agentic AI tools is that some of them are launching multiple threads at the same time to solve these problems. And so it's going to use geometrically more computing power because of the approach of engaging with multiple, for example, large language model queries at the same time.
So, Brian, now I think you've helped to create our next product together, skunk detection for technology. Okay. Launch an agent to find out where the skunks are at in the technology. And boy, there's a lot of skunks out there right now.
We just want a world where it doesn't stink. Nobody wants that.
Well, we have 14 different announcements that we want to cover with you today. 14 that have happened within the prior 60 days of our recording this podcast today. The first one we're going to call out, and probably was a trigger for some of this, was Intuit's Agentic AI announcement on June 27th. Now, in this particular case, Intuit has been building their AI engine for about 6 years. They currently have a
Off of your
policy.
data, off
Yes.
of your
And in fact, that's really one of the key points here is there is no option to no, there's no way to opt out for any client or yourself for any of the accounting data. So it's one of the downsides as we see it. They're trying to deliver upside with four generative agents that can autonomously work across QuickBooks for payments, accounting, finance, and customer support. And these agents can automate payment reminders and reconcile bank transactions and forecast cash flows and draft client emails. And they can do all those things agent, without human interventions, completely done by agents. Now, IDC claims that agents will be a $25 billion business within 3 years. The productivity gain here is genuine. Intuit's proprietary GenOS operating system is doing all sorts of actions. So, Brian, I've probably taken a lot of the thunder on this, but what would you also want our listeners to know about Intuit's Agentic AI announcement and release?
Well, they came out with another release about 4 weeks after this, and I didn't see, it was really focused on the Intuit Enterprise Suite, which is really their addition to QuickBooks Online Advanced. They're adding on to it a number of marketing and other tools there to call it an enterprise suite. And just remember here, this is not enterprise. This is enterprisey like it integrates, okay, but it's not enterprisey like SAP and Oracle, okay. So nobody in Germany at SAP needs to worry about getting displaced by Intuit's enterprise suite, okay. But it is kind of a lower end mid market product. And again, it's going to be interesting to see how some of these other AI related tools that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes that are going to affect it, because it's Intuit is really gone all in for this, and they've made a number of choices that have alienated accounting professionals, including pretty much ending new sales of QuickBooks Desktop, and kind of signaling not so subtly that QuickBooks Desktop and probably QuickBooks Enterprise may may be endings in the intermediate term. So I guess what I just generally would say here is that they've gone all in on AI, and it's going to be interesting to see what our relationship looks like as a profession with Intuit based on some of the choices they're making, which tend to favor their use of AI, their use of sensitive data for purposes that make most of us pretty uncomfortable. So anyway,
Well,
but a
that
lot,
said,
lot of announcements here. A
that's
lot of
a there is a lot of announcements. So we're going to start with the Smart Vault product there. Their DMS has a new feature called Smart Request AI, which automates a document collection and client intake process. And their Smart Vault believes that this could save 60 to 90 minutes per return, which is a pretty big deal. Of course, Smart Vault has also integrated with a lot of the primary tax products out there. And the key capabilities of Smart Request is the AI powered questionnaire and document request list that they can also do a bulk creation of client requests to save some time. They've got a firm dashboard to monitor the status. And then they actually organize a work paper generated from the completed request ready to import to the tax software. Now, whether that will automate the AI tax prep products like Black or Filed or Magnetic, those type of players or not, is to be seen, but it also can just import straight into tax. And I think they've done a nice job with this capabilities because it reduces a lot of the back and forth email and does save time. So that's one example of an agent that's been added to a platform. So, Brian, you want to maybe talk about Sovi from the sales tax people, Sovos?
Sovi is really just a sales tax tool that again that's in here, and I think this is indicative of, again, remember Sovos is really more of an sales tax tool. So it really isn't going to play as much in the small business space in there. But again, it does give some pretty significant embedded AI tools. I talked about Intuit's AI that they added to Enterprise Suite, and and there are some additional things there, but nothing super earth shattering, I guess. Data Snipper added AI agents to ask audit support questions. Randy, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that was done on July 29th. And, of course, the uh, vendor had released their financial statement suite earlier, but this was a follow-up to improve DocuMine. So you can now do a single query against content. So it would be possible, for example, to ask, what evidence do I need to collect to perform a SOC 2 user access control? Or can you extract the right evidence related to the SOC 2 control and match it to my sample list? And are there any documents with risks that need my attention? Those are all pretty interesting questions. Philo Richter, who's VP of Product and Engineering at Data Snipper, said that as the ecosystem of agentic commerce execution evolves, software development must evolve with it. And with Data Snipper agents running on Azure, we want to empower auditors with agents that work alongside them to automate critical tasks. So there was some very interesting support from Microsoft on the announcement, but Data Snipper itself says that new customers favor packages with AI products and agents will improve those experiences. So that's a lot of rant on Data Snipper, but that's what they've announced. So that probably gets us to the Bloomberg piece, Brian.
Yeah, and again, they announced some AI assistant research features in here. This is similar to what you'll see in here with Wolters Kluwer and Thomson Reuters and others. Again, I think most of the people with heavy duty content want to leverage that content to train AI models, and they're still trying to kind of figure those pieces out. We talked about the CCH, there's
And before you go on, Brian, sorry to interrupt you on that, but Brian and I did record a separate accounting technology lab on the Bloomberg tax AI capabilities earlier in the year. But the new AI assistant announcement from July 25th is actually a pretty big breakthrough in terms of adding additional pieces, and that has no additional cost. Uh, and it evolved out of an experimental development on Bloomberg's Tax Innovation Studio. So again, when you look at these announcements, sometimes there's fluff, sometimes it's like, yeah, this is part of the long arc of where the product is heading. Now, you and I both like CCH Answer Connect and their AI capabilities, so I need to turn you loose back on what you were going to say.
well, I think generally that these we're covering this primarily because there is a lot of big change taking place, and I don't want to get too deep into any of these particular tools in necessarily that much detail because I don't know that we have that much time left. But I will just say generally that the tools like CCH Answer Connect that pull data out of the tax applications and then actually will come up with planning opportunities, other things like that. And again, the level of capabilities that they're adding are is certainly worth looking at. And I will assure you that if we record another episode on this topic in 6 months, there will be many more innovations beyond what you see on this slide and the next slide.
Yeah, so it turns out that the WK announcement, which summarized documents with AI, that was pretty straightforward, but a big time saver, as it turns out. And of course, Ramp just took some more public investment money, sorry. And, their announcement were AI specifically for controllers looking at low risk expenses and suspicious receipts and other things. And, Brian, since you'd written a new expense session for us this year, you probably had your head wrapped around that pretty well, but it was one of those that, it probably is worth adding that even to our presentation just because there are others doing that, but that's a new agent.
Well, and it's been very interesting to see how much media presence Ramp has had. I'm seeing them pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
So,
They seem to be pretty wired for sound on that. And of course, Ledger did their AI tax assistant for rental property owners, where they were doing real-time tax calculations and automating expense classifications and adding properties and so forth. I mean, if you're in the property management business, their AI agent does some stuff that has to get done. And I think next up was Tipalti, wasn't it, Brian?
Yeah, and they had some AI native treasury automation statements in here to try to make it easier to do again things with their treasury. Again, more of a big company kind of thing here. But also TaxFile came out with, the interesting part about TaxFile and Integra Global and this and some of these other tools here is the combination of offshore labor and agentic AI and offshore labor and generative AI, I think is changing the outsourcing game pretty significantly too. Because a lot of the people that are doing pure play data entry, their work is we're literally being displaced by the advanced machine learning that we're seeing today, as well as the AI tools. And so there are people out there that have some familiarity with sitting in front of a computer all day that now they can deploy to solve problems that the AI is not quite ready to solve yet.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. In fact, a lot of the AI tools like TXF Intelligence, I think, will change the game of outsourcing notably. And, we saw that in other episodes that we've recorded in these areas as well.
now the ignition AI powered pricing feature is actually pretty interesting in my mind because pricing is one of those things that I think a lot of us people that tend more toward being technical accountants and less toward being the sales accountants. Pricing is something that's hard to figure out what the right strategy is and so forth. And so putting something into your proposal solution for AI powered pricing is actually a pretty interesting approach that we have. So I'm glad to see Ignition doing that.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, on the tax planning tool from Instead, Andrew Argue, we did get to speak with at AICPA Engage, and he showed us some of the tax return analysis reports and tax plan reports and tax strategy reports. Again, very interesting agentic AI driven reports.
and let's not forget that Instead has also had a like 8 or 9 figure investment from the Iris Group to create a new tax software, so a new tax prep software. So that's another interesting initiative there again, where it was announced in second quarter, I want to say. So we may have covered it in this, but it's a huge amount of investment from Iris to effectively create along with Instead to create a tax prep engine.
Yeah, and then you turn your attention to all of the HR and payroll companies' announcements. We just picked on Paycom, who's done an AI-powered Ask Here tool, and it's intended to do employee questions, mass employee inquiries, standardizing company responses, and in effect, be a self-serve communication center. And as I think about payroll regulatory or HR regulatory environments, having agents that are responding to the common questions that are, you know, national or state or international in scope, and filtering that with your own company's policies, that's pretty interesting because, if you've ever been around an HR office or around payroll processing, employees always have so many questions, which frankly are routine in most cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, very good. Well, it's an interesting time to be sure. There's a lot of money being spent in this area. We talked about in a previous podcast the about the hundreds of billions of dollars that are being invested in AI right now. And I don't know that hundreds of billions are being invested in accounting, but a significant amount of investments taking place. I don't know what the future holds for us, but it's a very exciting time to be in the profession, to be sure. Any other thoughts, Randy?
Well, no, I appreciate you mentioning that because you're right. If we recorded this again tomorrow, not even 6 months from now, the answers and the observations would probably be different. But we tried to pull out announcements that were accounting centric to help you just get a flavor of how much is going on out there. And we clearly don't want your thinking about AI to be affected by what I would call flood the zone marketing. You're going to get hit from every which way with lots of information for a while. The information that was being delivered was frankly not really right. But most of this right now seems to at least have some essence of factual claims on the new generation products that are coming now. So, with that said, it has been a pleasure to have you listening in again today, and we'll talk to you again soon in another Accounting Technology Lab. Good day.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of the Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.